Blood on the Axe, uncovering the true story of Billy the Axeman. Welcome to Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, J. Nicoll, Nicoll Investigations, and this is our historical True Crime Tuesday series. Today we're diving into one of the most infamous and elusive serial killers in American history, Billy the Axeman. Active in the early 20th century, Billy's brutal crimes left a trail of terror across the Midwest and beyond. Let's explore the facts, theories, and investigations surrounding this cold case. Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's True Crime Podcast. It's gripping true crime podcast uncovering unsolved murders, disappearances, and forgotten crimes from Ontario and beyond. Told with deep research, compelling storytelling, and a voice for the victims. Join us today, where every clue could lead to answers, and every case deserves a second look. Segment 1. The Early Attacks. The suspected killing spree of Billy the Axeman is believed by some to have begun in June 1911, with the murder of the Hampson family in Oregon. However, one of the most infamous and well-documented cases is the murder of the Hill family in Ardenwald, Oregon, near Portland, on September 11, 1911. The family, consisting of parents James and Della Hill, and their 4 children, were found bludgeoned to death with an axe. The crime scene showed signs of a meticulous and calculated attack. The Hills were well respected in their community. The brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through the small town. The investigation into the Hill family murders was extensive, with law enforcement collecting evidence and interviewing potential witnesses. The police found a trail of footprints leading from the house to a nearby railroad track, suggesting the killer may have used the train to escape. However, despite their efforts, no one was ever charged in connection with the crime. The case remains one of the most infamous unsolved murders in Oregon history. Over the next several months, similar attacks occurred across the Midwest and the West Coast, with families being brutally murdered in their homes. The crimes were characterized by the brutality and the use of an axe as a murder weapon. The killer seemed to be targeting families with young children, and the attacks often occurred in the early morning hours when the families were most vulnerable. Some of the other notable cases include the murder of the Coble family in Rainier, Washington, and the murder of the Burnham and Wayne families in Colorado Springs, Colorado. In each of these cases, the killer used the same modus operandi, entering the homes through unlocked doors or windows and using an axe to bludgeon the victims to death. Section 2. The signature and modus operandi. Billy's signature involved using the blunt side of an axe to crush his victims' skulls, often while they slept. This method of attack suggests a level of calculation and planning, as the killer would need to get close to his victims without waking them. The use of the blunt side of the axe also suggests a desire to inflict maximum damage, without necessarily making a lot of noise. The crime scenes also showed signs of a ritualistic element, some victims being staged in sexually explicit positions. This has led some researchers to believe that Billy's crimes had necrophiliac and pedophiliac elements. The killer may have also had a fascination with the faces of his victims. Some crime scenes show faces being covered or mirrors being smashed. Billy's modus operandi also involved entering homes through unlocked doors or windows, using a lamp from the house to light his way, and carefully avoiding leaving fingerprints. This level of planning and attention to detail suggests that Billy was a highly intelligent and calculating individual. Furthermore, the killer's ability to evade capture and avoid leaving behind any significant evidence suggests that he was highly familiar with the areas he was targeting. He may have had knowledge of the local terrain, the layout of the homes, and the daily routines of the families. The ritualistic elements of his crimes also suggests that Billy may have had a psychological or psychiatric condition that drove him to commit these heinous acts. Some researchers have suggested that Billy may have had a personality disorder, such as antisocial personality disorder, that allowed him to commit these crimes without remorse. Up next, notable cases and theories. Notable cases and theories. Some of the most notable cases attributed to Billy the Axeman include the Rainier family murders in Washington, Colorado Springs murders of the Burnham and Wayne families, and the Monmouth, Oregon case. In each of these cases, the killer used the same modus operandi, entering the homes through unlocked doors or windows and using an axe to bludgeon the victims to death. The Rainier family murders occurred on July 2, 1911, when the Nicoll family was found dead in their home. The killer had used an axe to bludgeon the family members, including 3 young children. The crime scene was particularly brutal, with evidence of a violent struggle. The Colorado Springs murders occurred on September 16, 1911, when the Burnham and Wayne families were found dead in their homes. The killer had used the same MO, entering the homes through unlocked doors and using an axe to bludgeon the victims to death. One theory is that Billy may have had experience with logging or mining, given the proximity of crime scenes to such operations. This theory is supported by the fact that many of the crime scenes were located near railroad tracks, suggesting that Billy may have used trains to travel between locations. Another theory is that Billy may have had a personal vendetta against families with young children. This theory is supported by the fact that many of the victims were families with young children, and the killer seemed to target these families specifically. Some researchers have also suggested that Billy may have been motivated by a desire for notoriety, and that he may have been seeking to create a sense of fear and terror in the communities he targeted. This theory is supported by the fact that the killer seemed to target areas with high population densities, and that he often left behind evidence of his crimes. Investigations and suspects. Despite numerous investigations and suspects, no one was ever convicted of the crimes attributed to Billy the Axeman. Law enforcement agencies across the Midwest and West Coast investigated hundreds of potential suspects, but none were ever formally charged in connection with the crimes. One potential suspect was a man named Earl Nelson, who was known as the Guerrilla Killer due to his brutal methods. Nelson was active during the same time period as Billy and was known to have used similar tactics in his crimes. However, despite some similarities between the two cases, there is no conclusive evidence linking Nelson to the Billy the Axeman crimes. Another potential suspect was a man named Albert Fish, who was a serial killer and cannibal active during the same time period as Billy. Fish was known to have used similar tactics in his crimes, including bludgeoning his victims with an axe. However, despite some similarities between the two cases, again, there is no conclusive evidence linking Fish to the Billy the Axeman crimes. A third potential suspect was a man named Joseph Mumfre, who was accused of being the Axeman by a woman named Hattie Mae Wiley. However, Mumfre was later killed by Wiley's husband before he could be brought to trial, and the case against him remains speculative. The investigation into the Billy the Axeman crimes remains one of the most extensive and complex in American true crime history. Despite the lack of conviction, the case continues to fascinate true crime researchers and enthusiasts to this day. The Billy the Axeman case is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in our world. As we reflect on these heinous crimes, we're left with more questions than answers. Join us next time on Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's True Crime Podcast, for another deep dive into a historical true crime case. Thanks for tuning into our Historical True Crime Tuesday series. If you have any information or insights on this case, please reach out to us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more true crime stories and investigations.